The mahogany conference table stretched before me like a battlefield, its polished surface reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights that seemed to illuminate every flaw, every imperfection. Malik's tiny fingers gripped my blazer as I adjusted him on my hip, his warm weight both my anchor and my vulnerability. 23 pairs of eyes fixed on us, some curious, others uncomfortable. But Richard Collins's pale blue gaze held nothing but disdain. Well, Richard's voice cut through the morning air like a blade, each word precisely calibrated to wound. Looks like someone couldn't find a babysitter again. The scattered chuckles that followed felt like pins pricking my skin. Ladies and gentlemen, this is exactly what I've been talking about. This company needs leaders who can commit 100% of their focus to excellence, not... His eyes swept over Malik and me with theatrical disgust. Divided loyalties. The silence that followed was deafening. I felt the familiar burn of humiliation creeping up my neck, but I kept my chin raised, my voice steady. Mr. Collins, my childcare arrangement fell through this morning, but I'm here because the Morrison project requires immediate attention. I can contribute to this meeting while... Can you? Richard leaned back in his leather chair, a predatory smile playing at his lips. Because what I see is someone who clearly can't manage her personal life, let alone a multi-million-dollar project. How can we trust you with our clients' futures when you can't even arrange proper care for your child? The room felt smaller suddenly, the air thicker. Malik cooed softly against my shoulder, oblivious to the poison being directed our way. Several colleagues avoided eye contact, their discomfort palpable. Only Latoya met my gaze, her dark eyes burning with indignation beneath her emerald head wrap. Furthermore, Richard continued, his voice gaining momentum like a runaway train, I think it's time we had an honest conversation about priorities in this company. Single mothers. He paused, letting the words hang in the air like a noose. Simply cannot deliver the dedication this industry demands. They're distracted, unreliable, emotional. Perhaps it would be better for everyone if we focused our team on individuals who can truly commit. The words hit me like physical blows. In that moment, I wasn't Aisha Johnson, the woman who'd graduated summa cum laude from Spelman College, who'd climbed every rung of the corporate ladder through sheer brilliance and determination. I was just another black single mother being dismissed, diminished, erased. But even as the familiar sting of tears threatened behind my eyes, something else rose within me. A fierce, protective fury that had nothing to do with my wounded pride and everything, to do with the beautiful boy in my arms who would one day ask me what I did when the world tried to make us invisible. Richard's smirk widened as he delivered what he clearly believed would be the killing blow. So let me be crystal clear. Anyone who cannot maintain professional standards will need to reconsider their position here. Are we understood? 23 faces stared at me, waiting to see if I would crumble, if I would quietly pack my things and disappear like so many others before me. But they didn't know Aisha Johnson. They didn't know that every challenge I'd ever faced had only made me stronger, more determined to prove that a black woman could excel in any arena, could lead any team, could change any game. I shifted Malik to my other arm, straightened my shoulders and smiled. Not the defeated smile of someone accepting defeat, but the dangerous smile of someone who had just been handed all the motivation she needed to burn the whole system down and rebuild it better. Understood perfectly. Mr. Collins, I said, my voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly what was coming next. Crystal clear. What city are you watching from? Let me know in the comments below. I love connecting with viewers from around the world. The day that would change everything started like any other Tuesday in Atlanta. The Georgia morning sun filtered through my apartment windows as I prepared for what I thought would be a routine project meeting. Malik had been fussy all night, his tiny body fighting off a cold, and by 5 a.m. I knew my carefully arranged childcare plan was about to crumble. Mrs. Henderson, my neighbor who occasionally watched Malik, knocked on my door at 7:15 with an apologetic expression and a harsh cough. Honey, I can't take the baby today. I don't want to get him sick. My backup sitter was out of town, and my mother lived 3 hours away in Savannah. The walls felt like they were closing in as I calculated my options. But there were none. The Morrison project meeting couldn't be postponed. Too much was riding on it. I dressed Malik in his softest onesie, the navy blue one with tiny elephants that my mother had sent for his first birthday. His big brown eyes tracked my movements as I gathered my presentation materials, my laptop, and enough baby supplies to stock a small nursery. "It's just you and me today, little man," I whispered against his curls, breathing in that sweet baby scent that always centered me. Mama's got to show these people what we're made of. The 30-minute drive to Collins & Associates gave me time to rehearse my presentation on the Morrison Luxury Development Project. I'd spent weeks analyzing market trends, coordinating with architects, and developing a marketing strategy that could potentially net the company $12 million. My ideas were solid, innovative, bulletproof. But as I pulled into the parking garage, Malik's carrier in one hand and my briefcase in the other, I felt the familiar knot of anxiety in my stomach. Being the only Black woman in senior management was isolating enough without adding single mother to the list of things that made me different. The elevator ride to the 15th floor felt eternal. Malik gurgled contentedly, his little hands grasping at the air, completely unaware that we were walking into what would become a defining moment. The hallways of Collins & Associates always felt cold to me, all glass and steel and expensive art that somehow managed to convey wealth without warmth. My heels clicked against the marble floors as I made my way to Conference Room A, the company's most intimidating space with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Atlanta. I was the first to arrive, a habit I'd developed to avoid the awkward small talk that often preceded meetings. Setting up my presentation while balancing Malik required the kind of multitasking I'd perfected over the past year. He sat quietly in his carrier, occasionally babbling at his reflection in the polished table surface, while I connected my laptop and arranged my notes. One by one, my colleagues filtered in. There was Janet from marketing, her smile tight and uncomfortable when she noticed Malik. Tom from finance nodded politely, but chose a seat at the far end of the table. Sarah from human resources offered a genuine smile and even waved at Malik, who rewarded her with a drooling grin. But it was the entrance of Richard Collins that sucked all the warmth from the room. Richard Collins was everything I would never be in corporate America. A tall, imposing white man whose very presence commanded attention and respect without him having to earn it. His silver hair was perfectly styled. His Armani suit cost more than my monthly rent. And his confidence was the kind that came from never being questioned, never being dismissed, never being told he didn't belong. "Gentlemen and ladies," he said, his pause deliberate as his eyes swept over me and Malik. I trust everyone had a productive morning preparing for this crucial discussion about the Morrison project. He took his seat at the head of the table. Directly across from me, his territorial claim unmistakable. The meeting began with the usual pleasantries and status updates. I waited my turn, occasionally adjusting Malik when he grew restless, offering him a quiet toy to keep him occupied. My presentation was scheduled for the middle of the agenda, and I felt confident about my materials. The data supported everything I was proposing, and I'd anticipated most potential objections. But Richard's demeanor shifted the moment I stood to begin. "Before we dive into presentations," he interrupted, "I think we need to address the elephant in the room." His eyes fixed on Malik with theatrical concern. "Is this really the professional environment we want to maintain? Are we running a daycare center or a business?" The room fell silent. 22 other faces turned toward me, some embarrassed, others curious about how I would respond. Malik chose that moment to let out a small cry, and I automatically lifted him from his carrier, settling him against my shoulder with practiced ease. "Mr. Collins," I began, my voice steady despite the heat rising in my cheeks. "I apologize for the disruption. My childcare situation fell through this morning, but I didn't want to miss this critical meeting. I can absolutely continue with my presentation while, can you?" The question was loaded with contempt. Because what I see is someone who clearly has other priorities. How can this company trust you to manage a $12 million project when you can't even manage your own personal responsibilities? The words hit me like a physical blow, but I'd been preparing for moments like this my entire career. "Sir, my personal situation today doesn't reflect my professional capabilities. I've prepared a comprehensive analysis of the Morrison project that I believe will. Furthermore," Richard continued as if I hadn't spoken, "I think it's time we had a frank discussion about what this company needs moving forward. We need leaders who can dedicate themselves completely to excellence. not individuals who are constantly distracted by personal obligations. The silence that followed was suffocating. I could feel the sympathetic glances from some colleagues, the uncomfortable shifting of others who wanted to disappear. But what hurt most was the resignation I saw in a few faces, the look that said they'd always expected this moment would come. Richard leaned back in his chair, his next words delivered with surgical precision. Single mothers simply cannot provide the level of commitment this industry demands. They're unreliable, emotional, distracted. Perhaps it would be better for everyone if we focused our team on individuals who can truly prioritize their professional responsibilities. The drive home from that meeting felt like the longest 30 minutes of my life. Malik had fallen asleep in his car seat, his tiny chest rising and falling with the peaceful rhythm of innocence, while I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles had gone white. The afternoon Atlanta traffic moved around us in a blur of chrome and exhaust, but I was trapped in a bubble of humiliation so thick I could barely breathe. I kept replaying Richard's words, each repetition like salt in an open wound. Single mothers simply cannot provide the level of commitment. The phrase echoed in my mind, gaining power with each iteration. Not Aisha Johnson can't provide commitment, but single mothers, as if my entire identity, my worth as a professional, could be reduced to those two words. My phone buzzed with a text from Latoya. "Girl, are you okay?" That was some serious BS what happened in there. I didn't have the energy to respond. How could I explain that Richard's attack had hit every insecurity I'd been fighting since Malik was born? How could I admit that sometimes in my darkest moments I wondered if he was right? The parking lot of our apartment complex felt like a sanctuary as I pulled into my assigned space. The Peachtree Gardens weren't luxury living by any means, but the modest 2-bedroom I shared with Malik was home. The rent was manageable on my salary. The neighbors were mostly young families like us, and Mrs. Henderson next door had become like a grandmother to Malik when she wasn't battling her own health issues. Carrying Malik and all our gear up 2 flights of stairs had become second nature. But today, every step felt weighted with the crushing realization that everything I'd worked for was hanging by a thread. I fumbled with my keys, trying not to wake Malik, when Mrs. Henderson's door opened. "Baby, how did it go?" she asked, her weathered face creased with concern. At 73, Mrs. Henderson had raised 5 children as a single mother in the 1970s, working double shifts at the textile mill to keep food on the table. She understood struggles that went beyond words. I started, then felt my carefully constructed composure begin to crack. It was challenging. She studied my face with the wisdom of someone who'd weathered her own storms. "Come on over after you get settled. I've got some of that chamomile tea you like, and I made too much cornbread for one person." I nodded, not trusting my voice to remain steady. Inside our apartment, I laid Malik in his crib, where he continued sleeping peacefully, his long eyelashes casting shadows on his chubby cheeks. This was our world, his nursery with its cheerful yellow walls and alphabet border, the living room where his toys were scattered across my college textbooks that I sometimes pulled out to remember who I used to be before everything became about survival. Sitting on the edge of my bed, I finally allowed myself to process what had happened. The attack hadn't just been professional, it was personal, racial, and gendered all at once. Richard had looked at me and seen every stereotype he'd ever absorbed about Black women. Irresponsible, unable to prioritize, bringing chaos into ordered spaces. The fact that I was a single mother had given him the perfect weapon to wield those prejudices while maintaining plausible deniability. I thought about the path that had brought me to this moment. Growing up in Savannah, I'd been the daughter everyone expected to succeed. My mother, Aisha Johnson, had cleaned houses for wealthy white families while pursuing her nursing degree at night. She'd instilled in me the belief that education was the great equalizer, that if I worked twice as hard and achieved twice as much, I could overcome any barrier. Spelman College had felt like a promised land, surrounded by brilliant Black women who were becoming doctors, lawyers, engineers, entrepreneurs. For 4 years, I'd lived in a bubble where my intelligence was celebrated, where my ambitions were nurtured, where being a young Black woman felt like an advantage rather than an obstacle. I'd graduated summa cum laude with a degree in business administration and a minor in urban studies. convinced that corporate America was ready for someone like me. The early years at Collins & Associates had been about proving myself quietly, consistently. I'd arrived early, stayed late, volunteered for the difficult projects that others avoided. Slowly, I'd earned respect for my analytical skills, my ability to identify market trends, my talent for managing complex client relationships. I'd thought I was building something lasting. Then Marcus happened. 6 months of dating a fellow professional, someone who seemed to understand my ambitions and support my goals. When I told him about the pregnancy, his true colors emerged faster than I could have imagined. "I'm not ready for this," he'd said, as if readiness was a luxury we both shared. "You'll figure it out. You always do." Those were the last words he'd spoken to me. The pregnancy had been difficult, complicated by preeclampsia that forced me into bed rest during my final trimester. I'd worked from home, attending meetings via video call, maintaining my client relationships even as my body rebelled against the stress I was carrying. Malik's birth had been emergency cesarean section, 3 weeks early, and I'd returned to work after 6 weeks because I couldn't afford to take more time off. The months that followed had been a blur of 4 a.m. feedings, client presentations, daycare drop-offs, and the constant, gnawing worry that I wasn't doing enough in any area of my life. I wasn't the mother I'd dreamed of being, patient, present, nurturing. I wasn't the professional I'd trained to become, focused, available, climbing the ladder with single-minded determination. I was surviving, and some days that felt like the most I could manage. But I'd thought I was managing it well. My work quality had never suffered. My clients respected me. My projects succeeded. I'd believed that competence would speak louder than circumstances, that results would matter more than perceptions. Today had shattered that illusion. Richard had made it clear that in his eyes, and possibly in the eyes of other decision-makers at the company, I would always be seen as a liability rather than an asset. My expertise was secondary to my status as a single mother. My achievements were overshadowed by my divided loyalties. Malik's soft cry from the nursery pulled me from my spiral of thoughts. As I lifted him from his crib, his eyes brightening when he saw me, I felt the familiar surge of love and determination that had carried me through the darkest moments of the past year. His smile was pure joy, untainted by the prejudices and limitations that others tried to impose on us. "Hey, little man," I whispered, settling into the rocking chair my mother had given me. "Mama had a tough day, but we're going to be okay. We're always going to be okay." The next morning, I walked into Collins & Associates with my head held high, determined not to let Richard's public humiliation define my narrative. Malik was safely ensconced in daycare. I'd paid extra for emergency care to ensure yesterday's situation wouldn't repeat itself. My navy blazer was pressed, my presentation materials were organized, and I was ready to prove that professional competence had nothing to do with personal circumstances. But the whispers started. Before I even reached my office. "Did you see what happened in the meeting yesterday?" The voice carried from the break room as I passed. I felt so embarrassed for her. "Well, Richard has a point," came the response. "How can you focus on million-dollar projects when you're worried about diaper changes?" I kept walking, my heels clicking against the marble floor with forced confidence, but each word felt like a small knife between my shoulder blades. By the time I reached my corner office, a space I'd earned through 5 years of exceptional performance, I could feel the weight of collective judgment settling around me like a fog. My assistant, Jennifer, greeted me with the kind of overly bright smile people use when they're trying to pretend nothing awkward has happened. "Good morning, Aisha. Coffee's ready, and I've rearranged your calendar to accommodate the Morrison project revisions." "Thank you, Jennifer." I settled behind my desk, surrounded by the trappings of my professional success. My MBA diploma from Emory University, awards for client satisfaction, photos from company retreats where I'd been recognized as a top performer. None of it seemed to matter anymore. The morning email brought the first official confirmation of what yesterday's meeting had set in motion. Richard had assigned the Morrison project to David Patterson, a colleague with half my experience but the right demographic profile. White, male, married with a stay-at-home wife. The message was couched in corporate speak about redistributing workload and ensuring optimal team dynamics, but the subtext was clear. I was being sidelined. By lunch, the isolation had become palpable. Colleagues who usually stopped by my office to brainstorm ideas found excuses to avoid my hallway. The partners' lunch invitation I'd been expecting for the Morrison project never materialized. Even the administrative staff seemed to treat me differently, their interactions professional but distant, as if my professional diminishment were contagious. I was reviewing contracts when I overheard the conversation that crystallized everything I was feeling. Tom Bradley from finance was talking to Sarah Chen from HR in the corridor outside my office, their voices carrying through the thin walls. "Look, I'm not saying Aisha isn't talented," Tom was saying, "but Richard's right about the reliability issue. Remember the Johnson merger last year? She had to leave early twice for pediatrician appointments. And now this, bringing the baby to a board meeting? It sends the wrong message to clients." "But her work quality has always been excellent," Sarah replied, though her tone suggested she was playing devil's advocate rather than defending me. "The Morrison analysis she prepared was brilliant. Brilliant doesn't matter if she can't be counted on. This is a relationship business, Sarah. Clients want to know their account manager is available at a moment's notice, not worrying about daycare pickup times. It's just the reality of the situation." "I suppose," Sarah conceded. "It's unfortunate, but maybe she should consider a different kind of position. Something with more flexibility, less client-facing responsibility." I closed my office door as quietly as possible, my hands shaking with a combination of rage and hurt. Less client-facing responsibility. A different kind of position. They were talking about demoting me, shuffling me off to some administrative role where my divided loyalties wouldn't matter because the work itself wouldn't matter. The afternoon brought a stream of small humiliations that felt orchestrated. David Patterson, now leading my project, stopped by to ask for my files as a precaution, though he made it clear he planned to start fresh with his own approach. Janet from marketing mentioned that they'd decided to pivot the strategy for the Morrison campaign, effectively discarding months of my research and analysis. But it was the encounter with Richard himself that drove home how completely the narrative about me had shifted. He appeared in my doorway around 3 p.m., his presence commanding even when he was feigning casualness. "Aisha," he said, not bothering to sit down. "I wanted to follow up on yesterday's discussion. I hope you understand that my concerns weren't personal. They were purely professional." I kept my voice level, though my heart was pounding. "I understand your position, Mr. Collins." "Good. Because I want to be clear that we value your contributions to this company. Your analytical skills are strong. Your attention to detail is admirable." The "but" hung in the air like a sword. "But leadership requires different qualities. Reliability, availability, the ability to prioritize company needs above personal circumstances." "I've never missed a deadline or failed to meet a client's needs," I said. "Haven't you?" His smile was patronizing. "What about yesterday? When you prioritized your childcare situation over our meeting standards? What about the times you've had to reschedule client calls for personal appointments? These things add up, Aisha. They create a pattern." The gaslighting was breathtaking in its audacity. He was reframing every normal human need: medical appointments, childcare arrangements, the basic logistics of life, as professional failures. But he was doing it with such reasonable-sounding language that anyone overhearing would think he was being fair, even generous. "I'm recommending you for our new strategic analysis position," he continued. "It's important work, still client-related but with more structured hours, more predictable responsibilities. Better work-life balance for someone in your situation. Your situation, the phrase that would haunt me for weeks to come. Not given your interests or matching your skills, but your situation. As if being a single mother were a medical condition requiring accommodation, rather than a life circumstance that millions of women navigated successfully. I'll need to review the position details," I managed to say. "Of course. Take your time. But Aisha," he paused at the door, "I hope you'll see this as an opportunity rather than a setback. Sometimes we have to acknowledge our limitations and find roles that work better with our life circumstances." After he left, I sat in my office staring out at the Atlanta skyline, watching the afternoon shadows grow longer across the buildings where other professionals were fighting their own battles for recognition and respect. I thought about all the women who'd come before me, who'd faced similar choices between career and motherhood, who'd been told their limitations defined their professional worth. The pattern was becoming clear. This wasn't about one bad meeting or one moment of poor judgment. This was about systematic exclusion dressed up as concern for my well-being. It was about creating a narrative that justified pushing me aside while allowing everyone involved to maintain their progressive self-image. But as I packed up my files that evening, preparing to take work home so I could pick up Malik on time, I felt something crystallizing inside me. Richard Collins and his enablers had made a critical error. They'd assumed that because I was a single mother, I was vulnerable. They'd confused my circumstances with my character. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The knock on my office door the next morning was so soft I almost missed it. Latoya Brown peered around the frame, her signature emerald head wrap catching the morning light streaming through my windows. She carried 2 steaming cups from our favorite coffee shop across the street, and wore the expression of someone who'd come to deliver truth, not comfort. "Girl, we need to talk," she said, closing the door behind her and settling into the chair across from my desk. Latoya had joined Collins & Associates 6 months after me, and we'd bonded over being the only 2 Black women in senior positions. Her background in operations management complemented my strategic focus, and over the years we'd become both colleagues and friends. "If you're here to tell me how sorry you are about yesterday, save your breath," I said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "I've heard enough pity for 1 week." "Pity?" Latoya's laugh was sharp. "Baby, I'm not here with pity. I'm here with facts. And the first fact is that what happened in that meeting wasn't about you. It was about them." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to the conspiratorial tone we used when discussing the more toxic aspects of corporate culture. "You know what I did after that disaster of a meeting? I went back to my office and pulled the numbers. Every project you've led in the past 2 years, client satisfaction scores, revenue generated, deadline performance." From her folder, she produced a stack of spreadsheets. "Richard wants to talk about reliability? You've never missed a major deadline. Not once. David Patterson? 3 missed deadlines in the past 18 months. Tom Bradley? Don't get me started on the Henderson account disaster." I stared at the data she'd compiled, feeling something shift inside my chest. "Latoya, why did you—" "Because somebody needed to document the truth before they rewrote history completely," she interrupted. "And because I've been watching this pattern for years, not just with you. Remember Michelle Torres from marketing? Brilliant strategist, never missed a beat, but she had twins and suddenly she was not management material. Or Sandra Washington from legal? Top performer for 3 years until she adopted her nephew, then suddenly she was losing focus." The pattern she was describing felt like puzzle pieces clicking into place. I'd noticed the departure of talented women over the years, but I'd accepted the company explanations about career changes and personal choices. Now I was seeing it differently. "They do this gradually," Latoya continued. "First, they create an incident, something that seems reasonable on the surface. Then they use that incident to justify a pattern of exclusion. Before you know it, you're questioning your own competence." "But yesterday was legitimately unprofessional," I protested. "Bringing Malik to the meeting was a temporary childcare emergency that you handled with grace while still contributing to the discussion," Latoya finished. "How many times has Richard shown up hungover from his golf trips? How many meetings has David dominated with stories about his kids' baseball games? How many times has Tom left early for his wife's social events?" She was right, and the recognition stung. The double standard was so pervasive I'd internalized it without realizing. Men were allowed to be whole humans with families and interests and personal obligations. Women, particularly Black women, particularly single mothers, were expected to be professional automations who never let their personal lives intersect with their work lives. "Here's what you need to understand," Latoya said, her voice gentling slightly. "You didn't get this job because they were doing you a favor. You didn't get promoted because of diversity initiatives or guilt. You earned every opportunity through exceptional work. Don't let them convince you otherwise." She pulled out another document, my performance reviews from the past 5 years. Every evaluation was stellar. Client feedback was consistently positive. Revenue targets exceeded. Awards and recognition documented in black and white. "Richard is trying to gaslight you into believing you're the problem," she said. "But the real problem is a system that punishes women for having lives outside the office, while rewarding men for the exact same behavior. The validation felt like oxygen after I'd been holding my breath. For 2 days, I'd been second-guessing every decision I'd made since Malik was born, wondering if I'd been fooling myself about my professional competence. Latoya's research proved what I'd known deep down, but had started to doubt. So what do I do with this information? I asked. You remember who you are? She said simply. Aisha Johnson, summa cum laude graduate. Aisha Johnson, who landed the Morrison project because her market analysis was better than anyone else's. Aisha Johnson, who increased client retention by 15% in her first 2 years here. She stood to leave, then paused at the door. And when they try to shuffle you off to some better work-life balance position, you remind them that the company's success is built on the backs of people like you. People who do exceptional work regardless of their personal circumstances. After she left, I spent the morning reviewing the documentation she'd provided. The numbers didn't lie. My performance hadn't declined since becoming a mother. If anything, it had improved. The efficiency that comes from having limited time had made me sharper, more focused, more strategic in my approach to every project. But the numbers also revealed something else. The slow, systematic marginalization that had been happening to other women. Michelle Torres had been assigned increasingly smaller accounts before she left. Sandra Washington had been excluded from partner meetings. The pattern was subtle but unmistakable once you knew to look for it. Around noon, I received an unexpected email from Claire Morrison herself, the developer behind the luxury project that bore her name. She wanted to schedule a call to discuss some concerns she had about the project's direction since the team change. My heart pounded as I read her message. Clients didn't usually reach out to former team members unless something was seriously wrong. The call that afternoon confirmed my suspicions. Claire's voice carried the polite but firm tone of someone who'd built a multi-million-dollar business by trusting her instincts. Aisha, I hope you don't mind me calling directly, but I wanted to understand why you're no longer leading the Morrison project. Your initial presentation was exactly what we were looking for. Sophisticated, data-driven, completely aligned with our vision. I chose my words carefully. Mr. Collins felt that redistributing some responsibilities would better serve the project's needs. Claire's pause spoke volumes. Well, I've reviewed the new proposal from David Patterson, and frankly, it feels generic. None of the market insights that made your approach so compelling. I specifically requested to work with you because of your reputation for delivering innovative solutions. The conversation continued for 20 minutes, with Claire expressing growing frustration about the project's new direction. By the end, she'd made it clear that she was considering whether Collins and Associates was the right fit for Morrison Development after all. After hanging up, I sat in my office processing what had just happened. Claire Morrison represented not just a $12 million project, but potential future developments worth exponentially more. Her dissatisfaction with the team change could cost the company far more than Richard had calculated when he decided to sideline me. For the first time since the disastrous meeting, I smiled. Not the polite, professional smile I'd been wearing like armor, but a real smile that came from deep inside. Richard Collins had made a tactical error. He'd prioritized his personal prejudices over business realities, and now those realities were about to bite back. Latoya appeared in my doorway again around 5 p.m., this time with a knowing look. Heard you got a call from Claire Morrison, she said. Word travels fast around here. Honey, when a client bypasses the official team to call the person who got removed, everyone notices. She grinned. How'd that conversation go? Let's just say she's not impressed with the new direction. Latoya's smile widened. You know what this means, right? You're not down for the count. You're just getting started. The emergency board meeting was called for Thursday morning, and I knew something significant was happening when Jennifer knocked on my door with barely controlled excitement. Aisha, Mr. Collins wants to see you in his office. Like, right now. Walking down the hallway toward Richard's corner office felt like approaching a battlefield. Through the glass walls, I could see him pacing behind his mahogany desk, his phone pressed to his ear, his face flushed with the kind of stress that comes from watching carefully laid plans unravel in real time. Close the door, he said without preamble when I entered. His usual air of superiority had been replaced by something approaching desperation. We have a situation. I remained standing, keeping my expression neutral. What kind of situation? Claire Morrison called the board directly. She's threatening to pull the entire project unless... He paused, clearly choking on what he had to say next. Unless you're reinstated as the primary account manager. The satisfaction I felt was swift and warm, but I kept it hidden. I see. She specifically cited concerns about the new team's understanding of her market, demographic and vision. Richard's voice carried the bitterness of someone being forced to acknowledge a mistake. Apparently, your initial presentation aligned perfectly with her company's expansion strategy, and she feels the current approach is too generic. I waited, letting him fill the silence. The board is concerned. This project represents significant revenue potential, not just for this development but for future Morrison projects. We can't afford to lose it. What exactly are you asking me to do, Mr. Collins? He stopped pacing and faced me directly, his pale eyes reflecting something between annoyance and necessity. I need you to take back primary responsibility for the Morrison account. Work with David to ensure a smooth transition, but ultimately, this needs to be your project again. The irony was delicious. 3 days ago, he'd publicly questioned my ability to manage any significant project. Now he was begging me to save one of the company's most important accounts. I'm curious, I said, keeping my voice carefully professional. What changed your mind about my reliability and ability to prioritize company needs? Richard's jaw tightened. This is business, Aisha. Personal feelings aside, we need to serve our clients' best interests. Personal feelings. I let the phrase hang in the air. Is that what we're calling it? For a moment, his mask slipped, and I saw raw frustration underneath. Look, you want an apology? Fine, I may have been hasty in my assessment of the situation, but right now, we need to focus on salvaging this deal. It wasn't an apology, and we both knew it. But it was an admission that his professional concerns had been anything but professional. I'll need full authority over the project, I said. Complete decision-making power over strategy, timeline, and team composition. And I want it in writing. Richard's face reddened. That's not how we typically... Mr. Collins, I interrupted, my voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who held all the cards. Claire Morrison specifically requested me. The board is concerned about losing a $12 million account. I'm offering to solve both problems, but I need assurance that I won't be undermined again the moment someone decides my methods don't align with their personal preferences. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. Finally, Richard nodded curtly. Fine, you'll have project authority, but I expect regular updates and full transparency about your approach. Of course, professional standards should apply to everyone equally, don't you think? An hour later, I was back in conference room A, but this time the energy was completely different. The same mahogany table, the same floor-to-ceiling windows, but now I sat at the head where Richard usually positioned himself. Claire Morrison appeared on the large screen via video conference, her silver hair styled in an elegant bob, her expression businesslike but warm. Aisha, I'm so glad we could arrange this meeting, Claire said. I have to be honest. I was quite concerned about the project's direction after our last conversation. David Patterson sat to my left, his discomfort palpable. 3 days ago, he'd been the golden boy handed a prestige project. Now he was back to supporting role, and his resentment was obvious in every rigid line of his posture. I understand your concerns, Ms. Morrison, I replied. I've reviewed the materials presented in my absence, and I share your reservations. The approach lacks the market sophistication and demographic understanding that your project deserves. Claire leaned forward on the screen. Exactly. The Morrison luxury development isn't just about building expensive homes. It's about creating a lifestyle ecosystem that appeals to successful professionals who value both privacy and connectivity. The previous proposal felt like a generic luxury marketing template. I pulled up my original presentation, enhanced with additional research I'd conducted over the past few days. Let me share some updated market analysis that I think better captures your vision. The next 30 minutes felt like a vindication of everything I'd believed about my professional capabilities. Claire's engagement was immediate and enthusiastic as I walked through demographic trends, buyer psychology, and marketing strategies that positioned Morrison Development as a premium lifestyle choice rather than just another luxury neighborhood. "This is exactly what I was looking for," Claire said when I finished. "The integration of work-from-home spaces with community networking areas, the emphasis on multi-generational appeal, the sustainability features that align with professional values. This demonstrates a deep understanding of our target market." David cleared his throat. "Ms. Morrison, I'd like to add that my team has been working on some complementary approaches that might—" "I appreciate that." "David," Claire interrupted politely but firmly, "but I think Aisha has captured the essence of what Morrison Development represents. I'd like to move forward with her comprehensive approach." After the call ended, David gathered his materials with barely concealed frustration. "Congratulations," he said, his tone suggesting anything but celebration. "I guess the client knows what she wants." "She does," I agreed. "And what she wants is results, not politics." The rest of the afternoon was a whirlwind of strategic planning and team coordination. I assembled the core group I wanted for the Morrison project: Latoya from operations, Marcus Chen from creative design, and Jennifer Rodriguez from client relations. Each brought specific expertise that complemented my strategic vision, and more importantly, each had proven they could deliver exceptional work regardless of personal circumstances. But it was the meeting with the senior partners at 4 p.m. that felt like the real test. Robert Matthews, the firm's founding partner, presided over the discussion with the kind of gravitas that comes from building a company from nothing. His silver mustache and wire-rimmed glasses gave him the appearance of a benevolent grandfather, but I knew his reputation for sharp business instincts. "Aisha," he began, "we find ourselves in an interesting situation. Claire Morrison has made it clear that your leadership is essential to this project's success. That puts us in the position of having to acknowledge that perhaps our initial team assignments weren't optimal." I chose my words carefully. "Mr. Matthews, my only concern is delivering the best possible results for our client. Ms. Morrison has specific needs and expectations, and I believe my approach aligns with her vision." "Indeed." He glanced at Richard, whose jaw was still tight with suppressed anger. Richard has briefed us on the circumstances that led to the team change, and while his concerns about professional standards are valid, it's clear that client satisfaction must be our primary consideration. Patricia Wells, the firm's managing partner, leaned forward. "What we need to understand, Aisha, is whether you can manage the demands of this project while maintaining the reliability our clients expect. This account could lead to significant future business with Morrison Development." The question hung in the air like a challenge. They were giving me an opportunity, but they were also making it clear that failure would confirm every stereotype Richard had invoked. "Ms. Wells," I said, meeting her gaze directly, "I've never missed a deadline, never failed to meet a client's expectations, and never compromised the quality of my work due to personal circumstances. The Morrison project will receive my complete professional attention, just as every project has for the past 5 years." Robert nodded slowly. "Claire Morrison is expecting a revised proposal by Monday morning. That's 4 days to refine your strategy, coordinate with the design team, and prepare a presentation that could determine whether we maintain this relationship long-term. Are you confident you can deliver?" "Absolutely." "Good." He closed the folder in front of him. "Then you have full authority over this project, effective immediately. Richard will provide any support you need, and all team members will report through you for Morrison-related activities." As we filed out of the conference room, I felt the weight of what had just happened. This wasn't just about one project. It was about proving that excellence had nothing to do with personal circumstances, that professional competence couldn't be defined by family status or lifestyle choices. But I also knew that the stakes had been raised significantly. Success would vindicate everything I believed about merit-based advancement. Failure would confirm every prejudice Richard had voiced and potentially end my career at Collins & Associates. That evening, as I picked up Malik from daycare, his face lighting up when he saw me, I felt the familiar surge of determination that motherhood had brought into my life. He was my motivation, but he was also my strength. Every challenge I'd overcome in the past year had prepared me for this moment. "What do you think, little man?" I asked as we drove home through Atlanta's early evening traffic. "Ready to show them what Team Johnson can do?" His babbled response sounded like agreement to me. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made Atlanta feel alive with possibility. I'd been in the office since 6 a.m., coordinating with the design team, reviewing market data, and refining every detail of the Morrison presentation. My conference table was covered with architectural renderings, demographic charts, marketing mock-ups, and financial projections, the visual representation of 4 days of intensive strategic work. Latoya appeared in my doorway with coffee, and the expression of someone who'd been watching corporate drama unfold with fascination. Girl, the whole office is buzzing about Monday's presentation. People are taking bets on whether you'll pull this off. What odds are they giving me? I asked, not looking up from the buyer persona, profiles I was reviewing. Let's just say Richard's been telling anyone who'll listen that 4 days isn't enough time to salvage a project that took weeks to develop originally. She settled into the chair across from my desk. But I've been watching your work, and I think you're about to prove some people very wrong. The weekend had been a masterclass in efficiency and focus. While Malik napped on Saturday, I'd refined the market positioning strategy, identifying specific lifestyle elements that would differentiate Morrison Development from every other luxury community in Atlanta. Sunday evening, after putting him to bed, I'd worked until 2 a.m. perfecting the financial projections that would demonstrate not just the project's profitability, but its long-term market sustainability. The key insight had come during a late-night research session about multi-generational wealth building. Morrison Development wasn't just selling homes, they were selling legacy. The buyers weren't just successful professionals. They were people building generational wealth who needed properties that would appreciate not just in value, but in desirability over decades. Marcus Chen from Creative Design knocked on my door at 10 a.m. with the visual materials I'd requested. Aisha, these renderings are incredible, he said, spreading the architectural presentations across my desk. When you explained the lifestyle integration concept, I wasn't sure how to visualize it, but now I see exactly what you meant. The renderings showed more than just beautiful homes. They depicted a community, ecosystem where professional networking spaces seamlessly blended with family recreation areas, where home offices were designed for video conferencing but connected to soundproof nurseries, where sustainable features weren't just environmental statements, but long-term investment strategies. This is going to revolutionize how we think about luxury development marketing, Marcus continued. You've identified needs that buyers don't even know they have yet. Jennifer Rodriguez joined us around noon with client relationship data that supported my positioning strategy. I've been analyzing Morrison Development's previous projects and their buyer demographics, she reported. Your multi-generational approach aligns perfectly with their most successful sales patterns. Properties that appeal to both young professionals and their parents as potential retirement options consistently outperform single demographic developments. By Sunday afternoon, I had assembled what I believed was the most comprehensive luxury development strategy I'd ever created. But the real test would be Claire Morrison's response, and the senior partner's recognition that client satisfaction stemmed from strategic depth, not just corporate politics. Monday morning brought an energy to the office that felt electric with anticipation. Word had spread throughout Collins and Associates that the Morrison presentation would determine not just the project's future, but potentially the direction of client relationship management company-wide. I arrived early to set up Conference Room A, arranging materials and testing technology with the precision of someone who knew there was no margin for error. The irony wasn't lost on me. This was the same room where Richard had publicly questioned my professional competence 4 days earlier. Now it would be the stage for proving him wrong. At 9 a.m. sharp, the senior partners filed in: Robert Matthews, Patricia Wells, and Michael Davidson from Business Development. Richard entered last, his expression carefully neutral, but his tension visible in the rigid set of his shoulders. Claire Morrison appeared on the main screen at exactly 9:15, her professional demeanor conveying both expectation and skepticism. Good morning, everyone. Aisha, I'm eager to see how you've addressed the concerns we discussed. I stood at the head of the table, not asking permission, not waiting for invitation, but claiming the space that belonged to the project leader. Ms. Morrison, thank you for giving us the opportunity to present a refined approach. What I'm about to show you represents not just a marketing strategy, but a comprehensive vision for how Morrison Development can redefine luxury community development. The next 45 minutes felt like the culmination of everything I'd learned about strategic analysis, client psychology, and market positioning. I walked through demographic trends that revealed shifting priorities among high-net-worth buyers, lifestyle integration concepts that addressed work-from-home realities, and sustainability features that appealed to both environmental consciousness and long-term property values. But the breakthrough moment came when I presented the generational wealth positioning strategy. "Ms. Morrison," I said, pulling up a comparison chart, "every other luxury development in Atlanta is selling to individuals. You have the opportunity to sell to families, not just current families, but future generations. When someone buys a Morrison home, they're not just purchasing a property. They're making an investment in their family's long-term financial strategy." Claire leaned forward on the screen, her interest clearly piqued. "Explain what you mean by that." I clicked to the next slide, showing property value projections and estate planning integration features. "We're proposing to partner with wealth management firms to offer Morrison buyers comprehensive estate planning services. The homes are designed with flexible spaces that can accommodate aging parents or returning adult children. The community amenities support both current lifestyle needs and future family expansion. When these buyers think about Morrison Development, they're not just thinking about where they want to live, they're thinking about the legacy they want to build." The silence that followed felt pregnant with possibility. Robert Matthews was taking notes. Patricia Wells was studying the financial projections with obvious interest. Even Richard was leaning forward, his earlier skepticism replaced by professional curiosity. "This is brilliant," Claire said finally. "This positioning differentiates us not just from other luxury developments, but from the entire traditional real estate approach. You're not selling houses. You're selling generational investment strategies." "Exactly. And the marketing approach reflects that depth. Instead of focusing on amenities and finishes, we're talking about building family wealth. Instead of targeting individual buyers, we're appealing to family financial advisors and wealth managers who influence multiple purchasing decisions." Claire's enthusiasm was palpable even through the video screen. "Aisha, this strategy could revolutionize how Morrison Development approaches every future project. The multi-generational angle opens up market segments we hadn't even considered." The questions that followed demonstrated genuine engagement rather than polite interest. Claire wanted to know about implementation timelines, budget implications, partnership possibilities with financial institutions. She was already thinking beyond this single project to the broader business implications of the strategy I'd presented. When the presentation concluded, Claire's satisfaction was unmistakable. "This is exactly the kind of innovative thinking that Morrison Development needs. Aisha, I'd like to schedule a follow-up call this week to discuss expanding this approach to our other upcoming projects." After Claire signed off, the conference room fell silent. Robert Matthews was the first to speak. "That was exceptional work. Aisha, the strategic depth, the market analysis, the creative positioning, this represents the kind of thinking that distinguishes Collins and Associates from our competitors." Patricia Wells nodded agreement. "The generational wealth angle is particularly innovative. I can see applications across multiple client sectors." Richard remained silent, his face a study in controlled frustration. "The question now," Robert continued, "is how we apply these insights more broadly. Aisha, would you be interested in presenting this approach to our other luxury development clients?" The offer hung in the air like a golden opportunity, not just project leadership, but the chance to shape the firm's strategic direction across multiple accounts. "I'd be honored to explore those possibilities," I replied. As the partners filed out, Richard lingered behind. For a moment I thought he might offer some acknowledgement of what had just happened. Instead, he simply nodded curtly and left without a word. Latoya appeared in the doorway minutes later, grinning broadly. "I heard applause coming from this room. Please tell me it went as well as it sounded." "Better," I said, beginning to gather my materials. "Much better." The week following the Morrison presentation felt like watching dominoes fall in slow motion, each small victory building momentum toward something much larger than a single project success. Tuesday brought a call from Robert Matthews requesting that I present the generational wealth strategy to the Piedmont Holdings account, a portfolio of luxury developments across the Southeast. worth over $50 million. Wednesday, Patricia Wells asked me to consult on the Henderson Estate project, where traditional marketing approaches had stalled for months. But it was Thursday's board meeting that changed everything. I wasn't supposed to be there. The monthly board meetings were typically reserved for senior partners and department heads. But Jennifer knocked on my door at 2 p.m. with a message that sent my pulse racing. Mr. Matthews wants to see you in the boardroom. Now. Walking down that hallway felt different than it had a week earlier. Colleagues who had avoided eye contact after Richard's public humiliation now offered genuine smiles and congratulations on the Morrison success. The shift in corporate atmosphere was subtle but unmistakable. I was no longer the single mother who'd brought chaos to a professional meeting, but the strategic thinker who'd saved a major account through innovative analysis. The boardroom at Collins & Associates was designed to intimidate, a massive oval table surrounded by leather chairs, walls lined with awards and photos from the firm's 30-year history. As I entered, I saw not just the senior partners, but also 3 members of the external advisory board, including Helen Cartwright, the formidable woman who'd built her own real estate empire before joining our board 5 years earlier. Aisha, thank you for joining us, Robert said, gesturing to an empty chair. We've been discussing the Morrison project's success and its implications for our strategic direction going forward. I took my seat, acutely aware that Richard was conspicuously absent from what appeared to be a crucial strategic discussion. Helen Cartwright leaned forward, her silver hair styled in the kind of sharp bob that suggested someone who had no time for nonsense. Ms. Johnson, I've reviewed your Morrison presentation materials. The generational wealth positioning represents some of the most innovative strategic thinking I've seen in luxury development marketing. Where did this approach come from? Thank you, Ms. Cartwright. The insight came from analyzing demographic shifts in high-net-worth buyer behavior, combined with estate planning trends. When you look at how successful families actually build and maintain wealth across generations, traditional luxury marketing completely misses the mark. Explain what you mean, Patricia requested. I pulled out my laptop, grateful I'd brought backup materials. Most luxury developments market to individual lifestyle preferences, beautiful homes, exclusive amenities, prestigious locations. But wealth-building families think differently. They're asking questions like, will this property appreciate consistently over decades? Can it accommodate multi-generational living situations? Does it position our family within networks that create business opportunities? Michael Davidson nodded thoughtfully. And traditional marketing doesn't address those concerns. Exactly. It treats luxury real estate like consumption rather than investment strategy. The Morrison approach repositions the entire conversation around long-term financial planning and family legacy building. Helen smiled, the first time I'd ever seen her display anything approaching approval. This thinking could revolutionize how we approach high-net-worth client relationships across multiple sectors, not just real estate development. The discussion continued for another 30 minutes, with board members asking detailed questions about market research, implementation strategies, and potential applications to other client portfolios. The energy in the room felt different than any meeting I'd attended at Collins & Associates. Collaborative, innovative, forward-thinking. Finally, Robert cleared his throat. Which brings us to the main reason we asked you here today. The board has been discussing organizational changes that would better position us for the kind of strategic thinking you've demonstrated with Morrison Development. My heart began pounding, though I kept my expression neutral. We're creating a new position, Patricia continued. Director of Strategic Innovation, responsible for developing cutting-edge approaches to client relationship management and market analysis. The role would involve working directly with our most significant accounts and leading strategic initiatives across all departments. The room fell silent as the implication sank in. Director-level position, strategic leadership, cross-departmental authority. It was everything I'd been working toward for 5 years, offered precisely when I'd thought my career was stalling. The board is unanimously recommending you for this position, Helen added. Your work on Morrison Development demonstrates exactly the kind of forward-thinking leadership this company needs. I looked around the table, seeing nods of agreement from every board member present. I'm honored by your confidence, I managed to say. This sounds like an incredible opportunity to contribute to the firm's growth. There is one complication, Robert said, his tone shifting slightly. The promotion would require some reorganization of current management structure. Some existing roles would need to be adjusted. The euphemism was clear enough. Someone was about to be demoted or removed to make room for my advancement. Richard Collins has been with this firm for 12 years, Michael said carefully, but his management approach increasingly seems out of alignment with our strategic direction. The Morrison situation highlighted some concerning patterns in his decision-making. Helen was more direct. He allowed personal biases to interfere with client service. That's unacceptable in any leadership position, but particularly problematic for someone overseeing client relationships. I chose my words carefully. My primary concern is always serving our clients' best interests and supporting the firm's success. Which is exactly why you're the right person for this role, Patricia replied. The board meeting continues for another hour, but we wanted to extend this offer to you directly. Would you be interested in the Director of Strategic Innovation position? The answer should have been immediate, but I found myself thinking about the journey that had brought me to this moment. A week ago, Richard Collins had publicly questioned my professional competence. Now the board was offering me a position that would make me his peer, or potentially his superior. Yes, I said finally. I would be very interested. Excellent. We'll formalize the details over the next few days. But consider this official, pending some administrative adjustments. You'll be our new Director of Strategic Innovation starting next Monday. As I left the boardroom, my mind was spinning with the implications of what had just happened. The promotion was more than professional advancement. It was validation that competence, creativity, and client focus mattered more than corporate politics or personal prejudices. But I also knew that Richard wouldn't accept this development quietly. A man who'd built his identity around being the office authority wasn't going to gracefully step aside for the woman he'd tried to humiliate a week earlier. I was right. Friday. Morning brought the showdown I'd been expecting. Richard appeared in my office doorway at 8 a.m., his face flushed with an anger he was barely containing. "Congratulations," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I heard about your promotion. Very impressive how quickly you managed to turn one project success into a complete career transformation." I looked up from my computer, keeping my expression neutral. "Thank you. I'm excited about the opportunities the new role will provide. Are you?" He stepped into my office without invitation, closing the door behind him. "Because I think you should understand what you're really getting into. Director of Strategic Innovation sounds impressive, but organizational change creates enemies. Aisha, people don't like being managed by someone they see as unqualified." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. He was warning me that my promotion would come with resistance, possibly sabotage. "Richard," I said, standing to meet his gaze directly, "I think there's been a fundamental misunderstanding about what happened here. This isn't about me managing you or anyone else. This is about the board recognizing that the company needs new approaches to client relationships and strategic thinking." "New approaches," he repeated. "Is that what we're calling it?" "What would you call it?" His mask finally slipped completely. "I'd call it a diversity hire getting promoted beyond her competence level because the board is worried about optics." The words hung in the air between us like a gauntlet thrown down. This was the accusation I'd been expecting, the final card he had left to play. "You know what's interesting about that theory?" I replied, my voice steady despite the fury building inside me. "Claire Morrison specifically requested my leadership. The board promoted me based on measurable results and strategic innovation. But you're right about one thing. This is about competence, just not in the way you mean." I moved around my desk to face him directly. "Your approach to the Morrison project would have cost this company $12 million and potentially future business worth exponentially more. My approach saved the account and opened new strategic possibilities. The board recognized the difference between managing based on personal preferences and leading based on results." Richard's face had gone from flushed to pale. "You think this changes anything? You think one successful project makes you qualified for leadership? I think 5 years of exceptional performance, client satisfaction scores that exceed company averages, and the ability to generate innovative solutions under pressure demonstrate leadership qualifications. But more than that, I think leadership requires the ability to recognize talent, regardless of personal circumstances, or demographic characteristics. The confrontation ended when Robert Matthews appeared in my doorway. "Richard, I was looking for you. We need to discuss your transition plans." The expression on Richard's face as he realized his supervisor had overheard our conversation was almost worth the stress of the entire past week. "Of course," Richard managed. "I was just congratulating Aisha on her promotion." "Excellent," Robert replied, though his tone suggested he'd heard enough to understand the real nature of our conversation. "Aisha, do you have a few minutes to discuss your transition timeline?" As Richard left my office for what I suspected might be the last time, I felt the weight of everything that had changed in 7 days. A week ago, I'd been the single mother who'd brought chaos to a professional meeting. Today, I was the director of strategic innovation, tasked with leading the firm's most important strategic initiatives. But more than that, I was proof that excellence speaks louder than prejudice, that innovation matters more than conformity, and that sometimes the best thing that can happen to your career is someone underestimating your resilience. Monday morning, October 15th, arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that makes Atlanta's skyline look like a promise of possibility. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, adjusting the emerald blazer I'd chosen for my first day as director of strategic innovation, while Malik played with his bath toys in the adjacent room, babbling his own morning commentary on our routine. 2 weeks had passed since Richard's public humiliation attempt, and the transformation felt both surreal and inevitable. The new business cards on my kitchen counter read, Aisha Johnson, Director of Strategic Innovation. But the real change was deeper than titles or corner offices. It was the recognition that competence couldn't be defined by personal circumstances, that leadership came from results rather than demographics. "What do you think, little man?" I asked Malik as I lifted him from his high chair, where he'd been destroying a banana with the focused intensity of someone conducting important scientific research. "Ready to show these people what Team Johnson looks like when we're winning?" His gurgled response sounded like agreement, though it might have been commentary on the banana situation. The drive to Collins & Associates felt different than it had for months. Where I used to rehearse explanations for potential childcare emergencies or practice defensive responses to subtle professional slights, now I found myself thinking about strategic initiatives and cross-departmental collaboration possibilities. The mental shift from survival mode to leadership mode was profound. The first sign that everything had changed was Jennifer's reaction when I walked through the main entrance. My former assistant, now reassigned to support Richard during his transition period, practically bounced in her seat when she saw me. Director Johnson. "Oh my God, congratulations." Her excitement was infectious, drawing smiles from other staff members in the reception area. "The whole building is buzzing about your promotion. People are so excited to see what you're going to do in the new role." The elevator ride to my new office on the 16th floor gave me a moment to process what Jennifer had said. People were excited, not resentful, not skeptical, but genuinely enthusiastic about my advancement. The realization was both humbling and energizing. My new office was twice the size of my previous space, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Peachtree Street and enough room for the kind of collaborative meetings that would define my new role. But what struck me most was the symbolic weight of the space itself. This was where strategic decisions were made, where client relationships were managed at the highest level, where the company's future direction was shaped. Latoya knocked on my door at 9 a.m. sharp, carrying coffee and wearing the biggest smile I'd seen from her in weeks. "Girl, look at you! Director of Strategic Innovation. Do you know how proud I am right now? We did this together," I said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Your research and support made all the difference." "No, honey. Your competence made the difference. My research just documented what everyone should have already known." She settled into one of the new chairs facing my desk. "Have you seen Richard this morning?" I shook my head. He's probably still processing the transition details with HR. The previous Friday had brought the final confirmation of Richard's departure. Rather than accept the lateral transfer to a consulting role that the board had offered, he'd chosen to resign entirely, citing philosophical differences with the company's strategic direction. The announcement had been met with carefully neutral responses from most staff, though I'd noticed more than a few expressions of relief when they thought no one was watching. At 10 a.m., Robert Matthews knocked on my door with the kind of purposeful energy that suggested important business. Aisha, do you have a few minutes? There's something I'd like to discuss with you. He was carrying a thick folder and wearing the expression of someone about to deliver significant news. Of course, Mr. Matthews, please sit down. First, he said, settling into the chair across from my desk. I want to formally welcome you to the senior leadership team. The board is unanimous in our excitement about the direction you'll be taking the Strategic Innovation Department. Thank you. I'm eager to contribute at this level. Which brings me to why I'm here. He opened the folder, revealing a stack of client portfolios. We've been discussing how to maximize the impact of your generational wealth positioning strategy. The Morrison success has generated interest from several other high-value clients who want to explore similar approaches. I leaned forward, recognizing the potential he was describing. What kind of interest? Significant interest. Piedmont Holdings wants to apply your multi-generational approach to their entire Southeast development portfolio. Henderson Estate has requested a complete strategic overhaul based on your wealth-building positioning. And Atlantic Luxury Communities is considering bringing their entire marketing budget in-house if we can deliver the kind of innovative thinking you demonstrated with Morrison. The implications were staggering. These weren't just individual projects. They represented a fundamental shift in how Collins and Associates approached luxury market relationships. There's more, Robert continued. Claire Morrison called personally to request that you lead strategic planning for Morrison Development's expansion into South Carolina and North Carolina. She's specifically citing your generational wealth approach as the competitive advantage that will differentiate their properties. In new markets, I felt a surge of professional satisfaction that had nothing to do with personal vindication and everything to do with seeing innovative thinking create real business value. The board wants to formalize this success, Robert said. We're proposing to structure your department around the strategic innovation model you've created, with teams focused on market analysis, client psychology, and long-term relationship building. You'd have budget authority for research and development, and you'd report directly to the executive committee. The offer was extraordinary. Not just promotion, but the chance to build a department around the strategic approaches I'd developed, with resources and authority to implement them across the firm's entire client base. I'm honored by your confidence, I said. This sounds like exactly the kind of opportunity I'd hoped to contribute to. Excellent. We'll announce the department restructuring at this afternoon's company meeting. But there's one more thing. Robert's expression shifted to something approaching paternal pride. The board wants to hold a client appreciation event next month, showcasing our strategic innovation capabilities. We'd like you to be the keynote presenter, sharing your approaches with current and potential clients. The keynote presentation represented the ultimate professional recognition, not just internal promotion, but public positioning as the firm's thought leader on strategic innovation. At 2 p.m., the entire company gathered in the main conference room for Robert's announcement. Looking out over the assembled staff, I saw faces that reflected the full spectrum of corporate dynamics, some genuinely excited, others professionally neutral. A few still processing the rapid changes that had transformed the office hierarchy. As many of you know, Robert began, the past few weeks have demonstrated Collins and Associates' commitment to strategic innovation and client-focused excellence. The success of the Morrison Development Project has highlighted the importance of creative thinking and adaptive leadership in our rapidly changing market. He paused, letting his words sink in. Today, I'm pleased to announce the formation of our new Strategic Innovation Department, under the leadership of Director Aisha Johnson. The applause that followed was genuine and sustained, with several colleagues offering nods of respect that felt like validation of not just my promotion, but my approach to professional excellence. The Strategic Innovation Department will focus on developing cutting-edge approaches to client relationship management, market analysis, and long-term strategic planning, Robert continued. This represents our commitment to staying ahead of industry trends and delivering unprecedented value to our clients. After the meeting, as colleagues approached to offer congratulations and discuss collaboration possibilities, I felt the profound satisfaction of seeing merit recognized and excellence rewarded. But the moment that meant the most came when Patricia Wells pulled me aside. Aisha, she said quietly, I want you to know that this promotion isn't just about your professional capabilities, though those are exceptional. It's also about the leadership example you've set, the grace with which you handled Richard's behavior, the way you maintained focus on client needs rather than personal grievances, the dedication you've shown to excellence regardless of personal circumstances. That's the kind of character this company needs in leadership positions. At 5:30 p.m., as the office began emptying for the day, I sat in my new space processing the extraordinary transformation of the past 2 weeks. The woman who had walked into conference room A with Malik on her hip, facing public humiliation and professional dismissal, had become the director of strategic innovation, tasked with leading the firm's most important strategic initiatives. But as I packed up my materials to pick up Malik from daycare, I realized the most important lesson wasn't about overcoming prejudice or proving professional competence. It was about the power of refusing to accept other people's limitations, of your potential, about the strength that comes from knowing your worth, regardless of external validation. Walking through the office lobby toward the parking garage, I passed the conference room where Richard had tried to reduce me to a stereotype 2 weeks earlier. The same mahogany table, the same floor-to-ceiling windows. But now it was a space where I would lead strategic planning sessions and client presentations as one of the firm's senior leaders. The drive to Malik's daycare took me through downtown Atlanta, past the gleaming towers where other professionals were fighting their own battles for recognition and respect. At a red light, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror, the same woman who had faced humiliation with dignity, who had channeled anger into excellence, who had transformed challenge into opportunity. When I arrived at Little Scholar's daycare, Malik's face lit up with the pure joy of a 1-year-old seeing his favorite person in the world. As I lifted him into my arms, breathing in that sweet baby scent that always centered me, I realized that he would grow up seeing his mother as someone who had faced adversity and emerged stronger, who had proven that professional excellence couldn't be defined by personal circumstances. "How was your day, little man?" I asked as we walked to the car. His babbled response sounded like a full report of playground activities and snack time adventures, but what I heard was the voice of a child who would never doubt that his mother belonged in any room she chose to enter, who would grow up believing that competence and character mattered more than demographics or circumstances. Driving home through the Atlanta evening, with Malik content in his car seat and my new business cards in my briefcase, I felt the profound satisfaction of a battle well fought and a future full of possibility. 2 weeks ago, Richard Collins had looked at me and seen everything he thought was wrong with modern corporate America. A single black mother who couldn't separate her personal life from professional responsibilities, who represented the decline of traditional business values, who didn't deserve a seat at the decision-making table. Today, I was director of strategic innovation at one of Atlanta's most prestigious consulting firms, leading initiatives that would shape the company's future direction and redefine how we approached client relationships across multiple industries. But the real victory wasn't the promotion or the recognition or even the vindication of being proven right. The real victory was the knowledge that I had refused to accept someone else's definition of my limitations, that I had transformed a moment of public humiliation into an opportunity for professional excellence, and that I had done it all while never compromising the values that made me who I was. As we pulled into our apartment complex parking lot, I looked at Malik in the rearview mirror, his eyes heavy with the satisfied exhaustion of a full day. This little boy would grow up knowing that his mother had faced every challenge with dignity, that she had proven excellence speaks louder than prejudice, and that no one, absolutely no one, has the right to make you smaller than you are meant to be. "We did it, baby," I whispered as I lifted him from his car seat. "We really did it." His sleepy smile was all the validation I needed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove that leadership comes from competence rather than demographics. New chances to build the kind of professional environment where talent is recognized regardless of personal circumstances. But tonight, we were home, we were successful, and we were exactly where we belonged, on top of the world we had built together, one professional victory at a time. The woman who had walked into that conference room 2 weeks ago with a baby on her hip and dignity in her heart had become the woman walking into her apartment tonight with a directorship in her briefcase and the future in her hands. And that, I realized as I tucked Malik into his crib and looked out at the Atlanta skyline glittering with possibility, was exactly the kind of story I wanted to tell my son when he was old enough to understand what it meant to never give up on yourself, no matter who else already has.